Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. I'm so glad you're here today because we're looking at a massive situation that just abruptly concluded on the global stage, the sudden, heavily political termination of the US-Iran war, known as Operation Epic Fury. Now, as we'll see today, this whole situation is basically an iceberg. On the surface, you've got these fascinating, incredibly high-stakes legal maneuvers playing out in Washington. But beneath the surface, we're looking at deep, potentially very dangerous geopolitical realities shifting right now in the Middle East. So today we're going to put on our policy analyst hats to evaluate what a premature exit actually means for long-term regional security. Let's get right into it.
Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. First, the 60-day deadline. Second, constitutional clashes. Third, the Hormuz reality check. Fourth, risks of a premature exit. Fifth, strained partnerships. And finally, the long-term global impacts. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the 60-day deadline. So what actually triggered this incredibly abrupt conclusion? Well, it was a ticking clock established way back over 50 years ago. This timeline perfectly illustrates how the law works in practice here. We're looking at the strict schedule mandated by the 1973 War Powers Act. Basically, this law requires a president to consult with Congress before deploying troops, and it demands a formal report within 48 hours. Well, the Trump administration filed that report on March 2nd, and that officially started a 60-day countdown. It legally boxed the administration in, forcing a really tough choice: either get explicit congressional approval to keep fighting or declare hostilities terminated by May 1st.
Which leads us right into Section 2, constitutional clashes. That ticking clock we just talked about, it built up into an absolute legal firestorm over the president's ability to just sidestep the deadline altogether. We really have to look at both sides impartially here. On one side, the administration argues that the commander-in-chief has inherent Article 2 constitutional authority, and that authority supersedes any statutory limits imposed by Congress, especially when acting in collective self-defense. But, on the other side, critics in Congress and various legal groups insist that the War Powers Resolution is crystal clear. Sustained combat requires explicit legislative authorization, and engaging in unauthorized warfare is a fundamental violation of the Constitution.
To really understand the executive branch's mindset right now, look no further than this quote. Vice President J.D. Vance perfectly captured the administration's sharp, preemptive pushback against the restrictions of the War Powers Act, literally calling it a fundamentally fake and unconstitutional law. Now, historically, a lot of administrations have found sophisticated legal workarounds to bypass this specific law. And this quote really highlights a firm, long-standing belief in the executive branch that foreign policy just shouldn't be dictated by a statutory clock.
But again, the pushback has been intense. Prominent organizations like the New York City Bar Association came out swinging, releasing extensive statements condemning the military operations entirely. Their argument is that the sheer scale and scope of these strikes clearly amount to war, and initiating that without prior congressional approval or UN Security Council authorization is a direct violation of both the U.S. Constitution and international law.
All right, moving to Section 3, the Hormuz reality check. So the war might be legally terminated on paper in Washington just to satisfy a statutory deadline. But the reality out on the water, it tells a completely different story. Just look at this number, 7. That is the exact number of ships that managed to transit the vital Strait of Hormuz in a 24-hour period shortly after the ceasefire was declared. Just 7.
To put that into perspective, let's compare. The normal pre-war transit volume was usually around 100 to 120 vessels a day. Now, it's 7. And check out the price of Brent crude oil, shooting all the way up to $126 a barrel. The big takeaway for us here is that despite the political termination of the war, Iran undeniably retains de facto operational control over a waterway that handles a fifth of the entire world's crude oil. And that brings us to a vital question. As policy analysts, we really have to look past the political headlines, right? We know how this ends politically, with a letter to Congress circumventing that May 1st deadline. But what happens after it ends strategically? Like, what does a premature exit actually mean for the folks on the ground?
Let's explore exactly that in Section 4, risks of premature exit.
We need to seriously evaluate the severe security risks of abruptly halting this operation before fully achieving the military objectives. The Jewish Institute for National Security of America, or JINSA, provides an incredibly sobering analysis on this. They point out that, historically speaking, politically motivated premature ceasefires don't actually create peace. In fact, they lead to endless cycles of war. Failing to see military objectives all the way through leaves adversaries completely intact, giving them time to rebuild, and basically dooms the U.S. to repeat a vicious cycle of withdrawing and then inevitably returning to the Middle East.
Because think about what is literally being left behind here. By ending the campaign right now, we leave Iran with terrifying capabilities. They're sitting on roughly 440 kilograms of 60% enriched, near weapons-grade uranium. Their drone and ballistic missile stockpiles, basically unchecked. They still control major global choke points through the Strait of Hormuz, and their Houthi proxies are still blocking the Red Sea. Perhaps most dangerously of all, we are leaving behind a highly emboldened regime that truly believes it just went toe-to-toe with two of the world's most powerful militaries and survived.
And if you want to know exactly how Iran views the ceasefire, all you have to do is listen to the new supreme leader, Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei. His rhetoric is incredibly defiant. He literally stated that Americans belong at the bottom of its waters. That signals very clearly that Iran's nuclear, missile, and maritime ambitions are absolutely not going to be negotiated away in some fragile truce. Make no mistake, they view this outcome as a victory.
Which brings us to Section 5, strained partnerships.
This unresolved, looming threat is having a profound impact on America's most crucial partners in the Middle East. I mean, they watched all of this play out, and honestly, they are disillusioned. Gulf states like Saudi Arabia and the UAE are realizing that by ending this war prematurely, those same Iranian missiles could easily rain down on their cities and energy facilities once again. And because they're starting to really question the value and the reliability of U.S. commitments, they're beginning to accelerate a strategic pivot. They are actively looking east, toward China and Russia, for more reliable security partnerships.
Finally, let's wrap up with Section 6, long-term global impacts.
Let's just zoom out for a second to understand the macro-level geopolitical consequences here. What does the rest of the world actually learn from this? The overarching lesson for our global competitors is incredibly dangerous. Adversaries have effectively learned a new playbook. If you can widen a conflict and inflict enough economic pain, for example, by choking off global oil supplies, the U.S. will eventually stand down to appease domestic political pressures. Meanwhile, Russia continues to actively resupply Iran's arsenals. The anti-Western alliance between Iran, Russia, China, and North Korea deepens significantly, and other competitors can easily exploit a distracted U.S. in massive theaters like Europe and the Indo-Pacific.
So I'll leave you with this provocative thought to ponder. We started today by looking at a legal maneuver designed to circumvent a 60-day statutory deadline. But in rushing to avoid a political problem in Washington today, have we simply guaranteed a larger, more dangerous, and vastly more costly conflict tomorrow? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking the hard questions, and I'll see you next time.